For 3 months, they slipped it into her evening meal, a pinch of crushed root, bitter and slow, hidden in the sweetest stew. The youngest wife, Amina, ate the poison faithfully, her body weakening, her spirit dimming, while the senior wives watched from the shadows with satisfied smiles. They were removing a rival. They had no idea they were killing the chief's only true heir. This is the story of a poison that failed, hidden within the walls of a chief's compound. It's about 4 women bound to one man, and a secret so profound it would shatter their world. But to understand how the youngest wife became a target, we must first understand the man they all married, and the immense fortune none of them knew he had. To the outside world, he was Chief Kofi Mensah, a traditional ruler of a modest agricultural district. But in the secret world of international finance, he was the Lion, a ruthless billionaire who controlled a third of the region's cobalt mines through a labyrinth of shell companies. He lived 2 lives, and the gulf between them was his fortress. In his ancestral village, he maintained the compound of his forefathers, a sprawling collection of clay and brick houses arranged around a central courtyard where life moved to the rhythm of tradition. Here, he was simply the chief. He drove an old Land Rover, wore locally woven kente cloth, and settled disputes between farmers. This was the man his 3 senior wives knew. Ajoa, the first wife, was the pillar. Married young, she managed the compound with an iron grace, her authority woven into every daily routine. Her children were grown, her status unshakable, or so she believed. Isi, the second wife, was the strategist. Sharp-tongued and fiercely ambitious, she had pushed her 2 sons toward modern education, seeing them as vehicles for the family's future power. Abena, the third, was the keeper of tradition, deeply spiritual, and the one who consulted the ancestors on every major decision. For 15 years, this was the equilibrium. 3 women, a balance of power, united in their shared world and their shared husband. Then 2 years ago, everything changed. The chief returned from a trip to the capital with a 4th wife, Amina. She was 22, an orphan from a distant, impoverished village. She had no family to advocate for her, no dowry, no political connections. To the senior wives, she was a charity case, a fleeting fascination for a man in his late 50s, a beautiful, quiet girl who would soon be forgotten in the shadow of their established influence. They welcomed her with cold courtesy, expecting her to fade into the background. But Chief Kofi did not forget her. He spent more nights in her small house at the edge of the compound. He was seen laughing with her in the gardens, a softness in his eyes the other wives had not seen in decades. The simmering resentment began. Whispers filled the communal kitchen. They called her a witch, a seductress, a hungry interloper stealing what was rightfully theirs. What they could not see was the truth. Chief Kofi, surrounded by sycophants and gold diggers in his other life, had been drawn to Amina precisely because she saw none of it. She loved the man she believed him to be, a kind, aging chief. She had no designs on his hidden billions because she had no idea they existed. In her, he found a purity he thought his wealth had erased from the world. He wasn't just fond of her. He was protecting the one true thing he had left. The tension in the compound needed only a spark to ignite. That spark came from the oldest tradition of all. The chief, now past 60, had no son from his first 3 wives who had survived infancy. According to custom, a special ritual with the village oracle was required to bless a wife to bear the rightful heir. The chief could choose only 1 wife for this ritual. The chosen one would be cemented as the most spiritually significant, the mother of the future. When he named Amina, the compound went silent with shock. This was no longer a matter of affection. This was a threat to the entire lineage, to the future power structure they had all built. In that moment, Amina ceased to be a mere rival. In the eyes of Ajoa, Essie, and Abena, she became a problem that needed to be solved. They gathered in Ajoa's house after sunset, the air thick with betrayal. Isi's voice was a low, furious hiss. She will bear the heir, and we will be nothing. Our children will be nothing. Abena, the spiritual one, looked haunted. The ancestors are silent on her. There is no blessing in this choice, only chaos. Ajoa, the pillar, finally spoke, her voice chillingly calm. Then we must restore balance, not with a knife, but with a whisper, a slow whisper the chief will never hear. They sent a discreet message to Essie's cousin, a man who traded in traditional medicines. A week later, a small, unmarked parcel arrived. Inside, a dried, greyish root, finely ground, aconite, known as the Queen of Poisons. In tiny cumulative doses, it causes fatigue, dizziness, a slowing heart. It mimics a wasting sickness, the perfect, untraceable weapon. That night, as the communal pot of groundnut stew simmered for the chief's evening meal, Adjoa stirred in a pinch of the grey powder. Not enough to kill, just enough to begin the slow, inexorable decline. She then ladled a generous portion into Amina's special bowl, the one reserved for the wife currently in favor. The bowl was carried to Amina's house by a silent, unwitting servant. Amina, feeling unwell for days but blaming the stress, ate every bitter, fragrant mouthful. The poison worked as intended, but with an unintended consequence. As Amina's strength ebbed, a new life began to grow inside her. The very air the senior wives feared was now taking root in a womb. They were systematically poisoning. For 2 months the ritual continued. Each evening, the special bowl. Each night, Amina slept fitfully, her dreams filled with shadows. She grew thin, her vibrant skin turning ashen. The senior wives watched her decline with a quiet, savage satisfaction. They told the chief she was suffering from a weak spirit, a melancholy that often afflicted young wives. They suggested traditional cleansings which they administered, doing nothing. Chief Kofi watched Amina fade with a dread he could not voice. In the boardrooms of Geneva he was a titan. In his own compound, he felt powerless against the invisible illness, claiming the one person who made him feel human. He began to suspect it was no natural sickness. Paranoia, born from a lifetime of business betrayals, took root. Was it an enemy from his other life? Had they found her? He made a decision that broke every tradition. Without telling his other wives, he arranged for the village's oldest and most reclusive healer, Nana Sawa, to visit Amina in secret. Nana Sawa was a legend, a woman who spoke to plants and saw the truth in a person's blood. She was also the only person in the village who knew the chief's full secret, for she had once saved his life decades ago, long before the mines. One moonless night, Nana Sawa slipped into Amina's hut. The air was thick with the scent of illness and fear. She took Amina's wrist, her gnarled fingers pressing gently. For a long time she said nothing, her eyes closed. Then she placed her other hand on Amina's stomach. Her eyes flew open. "Child," Nana Sawa whispered, her voice like dry leaves, "you carry life." Amina stared, uncomprehending. Then the meaning crashed over her. Pregnant. The heir, the reason for the chief's special ritual. A wave of joy was instantly swallowed by a deeper terror. She was too weak. Something was wrong. Nana Sawa's expression turned to stone. "This life is fighting a shadow." She demanded to see the remains of that night's meal. Amina pointed to the empty bowl. The healer lifted it, sniffed deeply, then scraped a fingernail along the inner glaze, tasting the residue. She spat violently into the dust. "Aconite," she hissed. "The widow's breath. They are feeding you death." The world tilted for Amina. The word needed no explanation. The shared glances in the courtyard, the sudden silence when she entered a room, the bitter aftertaste she had blamed on her failing health. It had all been real, a conspiracy of her own house. Nana Sawa went immediately to the chief, who was waiting in his private chamber. Her report was a hammer blow. "Your youngest wife is with child, your only viable heir, and your senior wives are poisoning her, drop by drop, meal by meal." For Chief Kofi Mensah, the world split in two. The businessman saw a hostile takeover attempt within his own family, an attack on his legacy. The man felt a fury so profound it threatened to burn down both of his lives. But the healer held up a hand. "Your anger will kill the child as surely as the poison. The mother's spirit is tied to the baby's. If she is consumed by fear and betrayal, she will lose it." She fixed him with her ancient eyes. "You have hidden your gold from her. Now you must use it to save her. You must tell her everything." And so that night the chief broke his second great taboo. He told Amina the truth. He led her to a locked storeroom behind his sleeping quarters, a place even the first wife had never entered. Inside were no treasures of gold or kente. Instead, there were files, ledgers, laptops, satellite phones. A map of the world with mining concessions marked in red. He was not a modest chief. He was one of the richest men on the continent. The compound, the old Land Rover, the simple life. It was all a meticulously maintained disguise, a sanctuary from the cutthroat world of resource extraction. He had married her, he explained, his voice raw, because in a life of staggering wealth, everyone wanted something. Except her, she had wanted only him. Amina listened, her mind reeling. The scale of the deception was unimaginable. The man she loved was a stranger. Yet, as she looked at his face, lined with genuine fear and anguish, she understood. The fortune meant nothing to her in that moment, but the reason for it did. He had chosen her for her heart, and now that heart was failing. "This changes nothing," she said, her voice weak but clear. "They are still trying to kill our child." The chief nodded, the ruthless lion now fully awake in his eyes. "Then we make them believe they have succeeded." A dangerous plan was forged in the dark. Nana Serwa would use her knowledge of herbs to create a powerful emetic, something to make Amina violently ill, mimicking a miscarriage. The chief would then openly mourn, turning cold to Amina, making her appear a failed and broken vessel in the eyes of the senior wives. Meanwhile, he would use his vast resources to secretly move her to a private clinic in the capital under a false name to detoxify her body and protect the pregnancy. The performance began the next day after a specially prepared tea from Nana Serwa. Amina collapsed in the courtyard, screaming in pain. There was blood. The senior wives rushed to the scene, their faces masks of feigned concern hiding triumphant relief. The chief was summoned. He looked at Amina, then at the evidence of the miscarriage, and his face became a mask of stone. He ordered her taken to her hut, then turned and walked away without a word. To Ajoa Essi and Abena, it was the ultimate victory. The heir was gone. The chief's favor had vanished with it. Amina was now just a sick, discarded woman. They called off the poisoning. The special bowl was washed and put away. Balance in their eyes was restored. But that night a different vehicle arrived at the compound. Not the Land Rover, but a silent, unmarked SUV with blacked-out windows. The chief and Nana Serwa bundled a barely conscious Amina inside. They drove through the night, not to a local clinic, but to a private airstrip, where a jet waited by sunrise. Amina was in a luxurious high-security suite in a hospital in Accra, surrounded by the best obstetricians and toxicologists money could buy. For 2 weeks, the senior wives basked in their restored order. The chief was distant, spending more time on business in the capital. They assumed he was grieving. In truth, he was by Amina's bedside as doctors flushed the residual poison from her system. The baby miraculously held on. The fetal heartbeat, once faint and erratic, grew stronger each day. Amina began to recover. Color returned to her cheeks. The constant dizziness faded. For the first time, she felt the quickening in her womb, the flutter of life. It was a secret joy, but a joy shrouded in isolation and a burning question: what now? They could not hide forever. The answer came from an unexpected source. Essie, the second wife, was not content. With Amina seemingly neutralized, her ambition turned to securing the future for her own sons. She began to pressure the chief about succession, about modernizing the family's holdings. She suggested subtly that it was time to incorporate some of the village's lands, which sat atop a rumored mineral deposit, into a more profitable venture. She had been doing her own research. Her probing questions raised the chief's suspicions to a new level. He had his security team monitor her communications. They discovered she had been in contact with a junior executive from a rival mining conglomerate. She wasn't just trying to remove a rival wife, she was conducting corporate espionage, trying to uncover the true source of the chief's wealth to leverage it for her children. The game had just become exponentially more dangerous. The poison had been a domestic crime. This was a threat to his entire empire. The senior wives were no longer just jealous spouses, they were active security risks. The chief knew then that the temporary exile in Accra was not enough. He had to end the charade, expose the poisoning, and neutralize the threat permanently. But to do that, he needed irrefutable proof, and he needed it before Essie's inquiries alerted his business enemies to his vulnerable position. He looked at Amina, finally resting peacefully, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach that was just beginning to show. He had to protect them, but to do so he would have to return to the compound and walk back into the lion's den he called home. The chief returned to a compound dancing on a knife's edge, but the trap he was setting for his wives was about to spring on him first. He arrived with a performance of cold grief. He ignored Amina's empty hut, spoke tersely to his senior wives, and spent hours locked in his private chamber, supposedly mourning. In reality, he and his security team were weaving a digital web. Hidden cameras were placed in the communal kitchen. A network sniffer was installed on the compound's satellite internet router. Every phone call, every message would now pass through his servers in Zurich. For a week, the senior wives played their parts. Adjoa maintained her dignified control, Isi sharpened her schemes, and Abena retreated into anxious prayer. The surveillance, however, revealed a hierarchy of guilt. Adjoa, the first wife, was the undisputed architect. She directed the others with chilling efficiency. Abena was the conscience-stricken follower, often heard weeping after their meetings. Isi was the wild card, her ambition now a blazing fire. The intercepts from Isi's phone were the most alarming. Her contact at the rival conglomerate Omni Metals was not a junior executive. He was their head of corporate intelligence, a man named Victor Kroos. The conversations moved quickly from village gossip to hard data. Isi, using her son's education as cover, was sending geolocated photos of the village's northern hills, land the chief had kept deliberately fallow because it sat atop his richest, most secret cobalt vein. Kroos was promising Isi a consultant's fee and a stake for her sons in any future development. He was also asking increasingly pointed questions about the chief's health, his schedule, and the unfortunate young wife. The corporate threat was now intertwined with the domestic one. Omni Metals wasn't just after mineral rights. They were probing for weakness, for a scandal, for leverage. Then came the break in the poisoning case. The security team, monitoring the compound's perimeter, tracked a late-night visitor to Isi's cousin, the herbalist. They intercepted the man as he left. Under discreet but firm pressure, he broke. He not only confessed to supplying the aconite, but revealed a devastating detail. At Adjoa's specific request, he had laced the latest batch with a second, rarer herb, false baneberry. Its purpose was not to kill, but to induce sterility. They hadn't just wanted to cause a miscarriage, they wanted to ensure Amina could never conceive again. This was premeditated mutilation, the cold, calculated destruction of her future. When the chief heard this, the last thread of familial obligation snapped. He had the evidence he needed. But just as he was preparing to act, the surveillance net caught a new, far more immediate threat. Victor Kroos, in a call to an untraceable number, was overheard giving an order. The girl in Accra, the clinic, verify if she's really there and what her condition is. Omni Metals had not only taken Essie's bait, they were hunting for Amina. The secret was bleeding out. The corporate enemy now had a target. The chief faced a nightmare scenario. If he exposed the wives now, the ensuing chaos would be a beacon for Omni Metals. They would swoop in during the disorder, using the scandal to challenge his control of the village lands in court, painting him as a man who couldn't control his own household, let alone a billion-dollar empire. His two worlds were crashing together, and Amina and the baby were in the crossfire. He made a drastic, desperate call. He couldn't bring Amina back to the compound yet. It was now the most dangerous place for her. Instead, he ordered his most trusted security detail to move her again, this time to a fortified safe house in a different country, under absolute secrecy. He then did something he had never done before. He called Amina and told her the unvarnished truth about the scale of the danger, about Omni Metals, about the hunt for her. She listened in silence, then asked one question. When do we stop running? Her strength, even through the satellite phone, galvanized him. Soon, he promised. But first we use their own greed against them. The chief set a new trap, a two-layered snare. For his wives, he let a carefully crafted rumor slip to the compound's gossip network. Amina had not died from her miscarriage. She was in a permanent vegetative state in a city hospital, a living ghost. This was designed to make the senior wives feel secure, even triumphant, and hopefully careless. For Omni Metals, he had his financial architects create a phantom. They leaked falsified geological reports to Cruz via ESI, suggesting the real mineral wealth was not in the northern hills, but in a contested area on the other side of the district, owned by a local rival of the chief's. This would send Omni Metals on a costly, time-consuming wild goose chase, drawing their focus away from Amina and the compound. The plan began to work. The senior wives, believing Amina was a non-issue, turned their attention inward, their unity fracturing without a common enemy. Essie and Ajo began to argue over the future, over the promised money from Omni Metals. The trap was closing, but the chief had underestimated one thing, the depth of Essie's fear. Feeling the walls closing in as the chief remained cold and unreadable, she made a panic-driven move. She contacted Victor Cruz directly and offered him the ultimate prize, not just maps, but the chief himself. She told Cruz the chief would be inspecting a remote farming outpost alone in 2 days, a lie, but a compelling one. She was no longer just spying. She was setting up an assassination. The chief's security team intercepted this communication in real time. The game had just turned lethal. The time for subtlety was over. The chief now had proof of conspiracy to commit murder, tied directly to a corporate rival. He had all the cards he needed to crush both threats at once. He summoned his entire private security team to the compound. He called his lawyers in London and Geneva, and then as the sun began to set, he sent a message to each of his 3 senior wives. They were to present themselves in the ancestral meeting house immediately. No excuses. The tone brooked no disobedience. They arrived, dressed in their finest, confused and anxious. They found the chief waiting, not in traditional cloth, but in a tailored suit, standing before a large screen. The room was lined with unsmiling security personnel. The atmosphere was not that of a family meeting. It was a boardroom facing a hostile takeover. He looked at each of them, his expression devoid of any warmth. "You have 3 minutes," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room, "to explain why I should not hand you over to the authorities for attempted murder, conspiracy, and corporate espionage." Then he turned on the screen, and their world unraveled. The screen flickered to life, and for the next 20 minutes, the 3 women sat in petrified silence as their own voices filled the room. Audio recordings from the kitchen, text message transcripts detailing the poison, financial transfers from Essie's account to a shell company linked to Victor Cruz. And finally, the chilling, crystal-clear recording of Essie arranging the chief's fabricated assassination with Cruz. The evidence was incontrovertible, a damning digital tapestry of betrayal. Ajoa, the pillar, did not crumble. She simply stared ahead, her face a mask of stone, but her hands trembled in her lap. Abina, the spiritual one, broke first. A low wail escaped her lips, and she collapsed to the floor, sobbing prayers for forgiveness. Essie, the strategist, turned her fury outward. "You spied on us, your own family. You are the monster here." The chief let her shouts echo and die. "You tried to murder my child," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "You sold our family's security to a pack of corporate jackals. You are not my family. You are a liability and a threat." He then presented his terms, not as a husband, but as a CEO managing a catastrophic breach. Option 1, a very public, very messy legal battle. They would be charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and economic espionage. Their children would be dragged through the courts, their names forever stained. Omni Metals would use the scandal to launch a full takeover bid, likely destroying the village's autonomy in the process. Option 2, a quiet, permanent exile. They would each sign a comprehensive confession, sealed in a vault. They would be formally divorced under customary law, stripped of all status as his wives. They would leave the compound immediately that night. In return, they would receive a modest but sufficient annuity, paid to them directly, not to their children for life. Their sons could remain in their educations, but would have no claim to the core business or the title of chief. The public story would be that they had chosen to retire to their respective home villages due to the stress of the tragic loss of the chief's expected heir. It was not forgiveness, it was a strategic settlement, a brutal calculation to contain the damage and protect what mattered, Amina, the baby, and the empire that would one day be theirs. Ajoa, understanding power, was the first to nod. She knew when she was checkmated. Abina, broken, could only weep her assent. Essie screamed, refused, threatened to expose everything. The chief played one final audio clip. It was a recording of Victor Kroos in a call with his superior, describing Essie as a greedy, desperate woman who will hang herself with the rope we give her. The contempt in his voice was absolute. Essie's defiance died in her throat. She had been a pawn and her king had just shown her the board. By dawn they were gone. 3 separate vehicles carried them away from the compound forever. The chief then turned his attention to the external threat. Using the recorded assassination plot as leverage, his lawyers contacted Omnimetal's board. The message was simple: withdraw all interest in the district and terminate Victor Cruz, or face a devastating international lawsuit for corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit murder, with all evidence provided to the media. Faced with a scandal that would tank their stock, Omnimetals folded, Cruz was dismissed, and the company signed a non-compete agreement. A month later, with the compound secure and the external threats neutralized, the chief brought Amina home. She returned not as the fragile, poisoned girl, but as a woman radiant in her pregnancy, her health restored. The compound was told a miraculous story: that after her tragic miscarriage, Nana Sirwar had discovered Amina was still with child, and she had been sent away for specialized care to save the baby. It was a story that preserved tradition while masking the ugly truth. The senior wife's absence was explained as a collective spiritual retreat. Few questioned it. The compound was buzzing with the joyous news of the impending heir. On a night of the full moon, Amina gave birth to a healthy son. The celebration echoed through the village for days. The child was named Kwame, meaning born on a Saturday, but also subduer of enemies. The chief, holding his son for the first time, knew his dual life was unsustainable. The poison plot had proven that his secrecy was a weapon that could be turned against him. On his son's naming day, he made 2 monumental decisions. First, he legally recognized Kwame as his sole universal heir, bypassing the children of his previous marriages for the core of the empire. Second, he began the process of integrating his 2 worlds. He established a foundation, funded by his mining wealth, to develop the village and the entire region, building schools, hospitals, and sustainable farms. He started to teach Amina not just about tradition, but about business, about the empire their son would inherit. And here is the final surprising twist in this tale: the deepest secret was not the chief's wealth or the poisoning or even the corporate espionage. It was Amina's own hidden strength. In learning the brutal realities of her husband's world, she did not recoil. She engaged with Nana Sirwar's guidance. She began to study not just finance, but the environmental and social impact of mining. She became the conscience of the empire, the bridge between the billionaire and the village, ensuring the wealth that had almost destroyed her would now uplift her people. The senior wives, in their exile, believed they had lost a battle for status within 4 walls. In truth, they had lost a war for the soul of a fortune they never knew existed. Their poison failed to kill a child, but in their jealousy they birthed something far more powerful, a legacy built not on rivalry but on resilience. A future where the youngest wife, the poorest wife, the one they tried to erase, became the foundation of everything. This is where our story closes, but their new story begins: a chief, a mother, and an heir, standing at the intersection of 2 worlds, finally united. And it all hinged on one truth: in a house filled with poison, the only antidote was a love that saw the man, not the money. So what does this story leave us with? A tale of poison, yes, but more importantly, a lesson about the masks we all wear. The chief wore a mask of poverty to find a love untouched by greed. The senior wives wore masks of tradition to hide hearts corrupted by envy. And in the end, the only thing that saved a life and forged a new legacy was the one person who wore no mask at all. The poison in the stew was just a symptom. The real toxin was in the air they all breathed, a climate of suspicion, of unspoken competition, of love measured in status and security. It's a climate that can exist anywhere, in any home, in any heart. The question this story forces us to ask ourselves isn't about polygamy or billionaires. It's about value. How do we value the people in our lives? Do we see them for what they can give us or for who they truly are? Amina was valued for her poverty until she was nearly destroyed for her potential. The chief was valued for his power until he was betrayed for it. In the crucible of that compound, every hidden truth was forced into the light, and what survived was not the strongest poison, but the strongest bond. It makes you wonder in your own life, what is hidden? What truth, if revealed, would change everything? And more importantly, what would you risk to protect the one pure thing you found? If this story of hidden fortunes and fierce resilience moved you, if it made you think about the unseen battles people fight behind closed doors, then do us a favor. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more documentaries that look beyond the surface, because the world is full of stories waiting to be uncovered. We'll see